in this ministry season, using the word "the" as an acronym for trusting, hoping, and exalting God. And the question is, what does it mean to exalt God? What does it mean to worship God? Because unfortunately, in our English Bibles, although there are a variety of words used in the context of worship that are translated in English as worship, they actually have a more specific meaning, like to bow down before or to serve. So the idea of worship has been reduced very much to simply, in a lot of contexts, simply music. Music is worship. And so they'll ask for the worship team to come, and that means the people who are instrumentalists or musicians, rather than having a larger perspective on life as an act of worship. But we still need to ask the question, what does it mean to exalt God, to worship God? And we're looking at three ideas. The idea of allegiance last week from Psalm 97. The idea of awareness of God, we're looking at this week. And then next week, we're going to look at attribution, Psalm 99. When it says, we will praise you. Well, what does that mean? Are we just supposed to say nice things about God? So we'll look at that next week. But 2 weeks ago, I guess, with Communion Sunday being in the middle there, we looked at allegiance, and these words that are translated worship in English generally come from a sphere of usage that deals with acknowledging a superior, or specifically the king, especially in the days of the Old Testament. They were language, not just in that context, but in the context of royalty, these words were common. In the context of addressing a superior person, these words were common. So there's a relational part to these words. And allegiance, when we're talking about worshiping God, part of what we're doing is confessing our allegiance to God. So Psalm 97 says, the Lord reigns. That's how it starts. And we would affirm that theology. The Lord reigns. But what does that mean? It means He is the King. He is the Creator. And the nature of our relationship with Him means we are not on the same level, but we acknowledge our loyalty to Him and we submit to His authority. And there's an implication of humility and of obedience as being a key part of what it means to worship God. So as we move into the second word, awareness, we're going to turn our attention to Nehemiah chapter 9. We've already looked at Psalm 24. I read that earlier. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. And in Nehemiah chapter 9, we see that expressed in the community of faith as Nehemiah and Ezra, working together as a team, are bringing the Israelites who have been in exile, in captivity in Babylon, back to the city of Jerusalem to rebuild the city and to reinstitute the worship at the temple. And they were able to reconstruct at least a part of the temple. It did not have the majesty or the glory of the original temple, but they were able to bring the people back and begin this reconstruction project. Now, when we look at the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, we can assume incorrectly that these are documenting the history of the people coming back to rebuild the city. That is the historical event that happened. But the theology of the book is people coming back and under the leadership of Nehemiah and Ezra, rebuilding their faith and what it means to be a community of faith that worships God, that worships Yahweh, the faithful covenant God. Israel, the Israelites, had been scattered amongst the nations as God promised they would be in that original covenant He gave to Moses. If you disobey me, if you worship other gods, and in that warning, the word worship is sometimes the word serve. In other words, you attribute your efforts or your blessings, your benefits in life to these false gods, or if you bow down before them, if you commit your loyalty and allegiance to them, then I am going to scatter you amongst the nations, because I alone am God, and there is no other. And we know the story of Israel. Shortly after Solomon died, there was a civil war in Israel amongst his sons, and the kingdom was divided. And slowly idolatry crept in, and then the northern kingdom went into captivity to the Assyrians. A few years later, the southern kingdom went into captivity to the Babylonians, and that's the time of Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel and those stories. And now, after that period, those who had been in the Babylonian captivity are coming back to reconstruct the city of Jerusalem. And that's important, because this was the place where God said, I will put my name. This is where my people will gather to worship. But the theology, the underlying message, Ezra and Nehemiah was not written simply to document a historical process of a construction project. It was written to remind not just that generation, but subsequent generations of the importance of maintaining faithfulness in their worship of God. And we see these great prayers in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, and great confessions of faith, and great gatherings of proclamation and renewal of the covenant as they recognize that they have been faithless to a faithful God. So Nehemiah and Ezra both stress the idea of Israel. You need to be aware that God is always God, and He is God over all things and all details of your life. And they go through documenting in great detail the sins of Israel, how they failed to keep the Sabbath, how they failed to care for the vulnerable and the disenfranchised in society, and the widows and the orphans, how they failed to live faithfully to God. And yet God was faithful. Even in the captivity, God was faithful because He told them that's what's going to happen, and He followed through. But now He's bringing the people back. In Nehemiah chapter 7, the walls of the city, the first thing they did was build the walls before they started building the inside. The walls are complete. The gates are hung. In Nehemiah chapter 8, as they celebrate that, Ezra, who is Nehemiah's colleague in this project, reads the Old Testament law. The people stood for hours and listened to this. They had not heard the law proclaimed and taught. And I love in Ezra, it says, and he explained it so the people would understand. I love that. And they were overwhelmed and grieved for their sinfulness. Then in Nehemiah chapter 9, they're coming together, and here's what we read. I'm just going to read snippets out of Nehemiah 9 because of the length. Again, I always encourage you, go back and look these up in context to make sure I'm presenting it accurately. But it starts this way. Now, on the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembled with fasting and in sackcloth and with earth on their heads. They were in mourning, grieving their sinfulness. And the Israelites separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in their place and read from the book of the law of their God for a quarter of the day. And for another quarter of it, they made confession and worshiped the Lord their God. Now, the word worshiped is one of these words that's been translated uniformly in English, but actually has a nuance behind it we need to understand. And it's to bow down. They prostrated themselves before God and said, we have confessed. Look at the description. They ripped their clothes, they put on sackcloth, they put dirt on themselves. They were grieved to the heart because they had so violently rebelled against the Lord their God, Yahweh. And so they bow down. And it wasn't celebration or worship like, let's raise our hands. Okay, I'm going to do a little rant here. Remember I used to do the rants? They're starting to come back. Here's my little rant for the day. Really, really cheeses me off when you hear somebody say, "We invite you to come and be with us, Lord, as we worship." When did he leave? "I will never leave you nor forsake you," right? So why do we have to invite him? Don't get me started or you'll get a twofer, so let's move along. I just throw that question out there. That's part of awareness, that we are living always in the presence of God. He doesn't come and go. All right, moving on. So, jumping ahead a little bit, Nehemiah chapter 9. This is part of the prayer. You are the Lord, Yahweh. Notice in your Bibles, it's in all caps, the covenantal name for God. You are Yahweh, and you alone. There is no other. This is the foundational truth for all faith. There is one God, creator of heaven and earth, and he has revealed himself as Yahweh. And this one God is creator. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all that is in them. You preserve all of them, and the host of heaven worships. The same word we just saw back in verse 3, bows down. Okay, now we're talking about inanimate objects here, but it's symbolic, it's metaphorical. Even all of creation is submitted to you because they are aware of who you are. You are Yahweh, creator of all these things, creator of them. And they bow down to you. You are the Lord, the God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and gave him the name Abraham. You found his heart faithful before you, and you made with him the covenant to give to his offspring the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Pezerite, the Jebusite, and the Girgashite. And you have kept your promise, for you are righteous. This is the God before whom we bow down. And that's why the image has that guy on his knee, because the core of worship is not about any emotive experience that makes us feel good. It is about humbling ourselves before the Creator God and acknowledging that He is holy, He is righteous, He is faithful. And then following through by answering the question, so what does that mean for the way I treat the idiot who cuts me off on the QEW? I got cut off on the motorcycle last week. It just really, I wanted to go and break the guy's mirror. There's a cop behind me, so I didn't. But after I calmed down a little bit, it was like, okay, no, you got to practice what you preach, Graham. Just relax. Nothing happened. It's okay. God's looking after you. But that stuff really irritates me. But being aware that we are living life in the presence of God, for Nehemiah, as he prays, he said, we need to remember Abram because you found his heart was faithful. You've kept your promise because you are righteous. And the implication is we have not kept our promise because we have not been righteous. Then down to verse 32 of chapter 9. Now therefore, our God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love. Let not all the hardship seem little to you that has come upon us, upon our kings, our princes, our priests, our prophets, our fathers, and all our people, since the time of the kings of Assyria until this day. Yet, a contrast, you have been righteous in all that has come upon us, for you have dealt faithfully, and we have acted wickedly. Part of the implication of Nehemiah's prayer is acknowledging that what they were doing as a faithless people was still under the vigilant eye and care of God. They thought they could get away with it. Will God know? Is he really watching? Yes, he is. And he's not like the Santa Claus kind of aware where he's keeping a list of the naughty and nice, or that vengeful kind of God that's just waiting for a chance to zap, or giving karma, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. He is, in his created order, watching over it and caring for it. And part of caring for his created order means also noticing when his people are faithless towards him, because he is faithful and we have acted wickedly. Verse 34, our kings, our princes, our priests, and our fathers have not kept your law or paid attention to your commandments and your warnings that you gave them, even in their own kingdom and amid your great goodness that you gave them. And in the large and rich land where you sent before them, they did not serve you. And that is often translated worship, but the word literally is to serve. In the noun form, this word means a servant, literally, somebody that's a worker of some sort, or who is working in Buckingham Palace as a page or whatever to royalty. That's what the word means. And in the verbal form, we've translated it worship, but it means to be in the act of serving. So what we do in life, how we embrace life, the priorities we have, the things that are truly, when everything is stripped away, that we truly, truly, truly love, that is the thing that we serve. And that is the thing we worship, because service is worship. But they did not serve or turn from their wicked ways. Behold, now, because of that, we are slaves, we are servants to this foreign entity, Babylon. There's a play on words here, using the same word, one as the noun that talks about being a slave or a servant, and the other one is a verb meaning to serve, which is often translated in English to worship. And Nehemiah is saying, because we did not serve you, we now are servants of something else because of our wickedness. And this is an integral part of what it means to worship God. That we understand that everything we do in life, being kind to somebody else, standing up for righteousness, being faithful stewards of the resources God's given us, acknowledging the limitations God has given us, all of that are expressions of service to the King. It's not just coming here. This is important. We'll talk about it in just a little bit. But it's not just this. It's not just the experience or the emotive part that we get lifted up in the event of a gathering. It is the things that we do from day to day. And not that we do them perfectly. Worship is not defined by being perfect. Worship is defined by allegiance. That our desire is to see the hand of God in the details of life and to acknowledge Him in everything. And in the frustrations, like being cut off by some idiot when you're on your motorcycle, is still something that God is doing for, I don't know why. I'm here, so obviously it wasn't take me home. Did I tell you I got, oh, it's okay. Yes, I did tell Sharon that it happened. But that sense of service permeated the entire culture and perception of ancient Israel, that they were taught all of life, the way you look after your crops, the way you look after your animals, the way you have relationships in your family, the way you relate to the nations around you, honoring the Sabbath day. All of that was an expression of their dependence on God and how they served Him. It saturated everything. It wasn't an hour a week. Verse 37. And its rich yield goes to the kings whom you have set over us because of our sins. So they got displaced and kings were put over them. They rule over our bodies and over our livestock as they please. We are in great distress. Because of all this, we will make a firm covenant in writing, and on the sealed document are the names of our princes, our Levites, and our priests. We're going to renew the covenant. Why? Because worship is not that emotive experience in an event. It is the commitment of a heart to follow after God in every detail of life, including the ones, we can distort this the other way and get up in the morning and go, oh, I don't want to be out of the will of God. Blue socks, red socks, blue socks, red socks. That's not the kind of thing we're talking about. That's an act of stewardship. Wear socks, or don't wear socks, whatever. It's understanding that even in that decision, there is a way to express loyalty and faithfulness to God. It's not like there's this narrow, razor-sharp edge that is the will of God, and if you deviate from it one way or the other, you're in sin. No, it's within the sphere of God's created order, honoring Him, and however it is we choose to express ourselves, but doing it in a way that reflects that He alone is God, creator of heaven and earth. The prayers in Nehemiah and Ezra are convicting and encouraging, and I would encourage you to go back and to read through. It'll only take you 20 minutes, half an hour to read through those two books, or maybe a little more if you read them both. But just such great encouragement, because here's a community of faith that had lost their way, that are now coming back and are learning again to worship God. And in Nehemiah chapter 9, what Nehemiah and Ezra, as he participated, want these refugees to learn and to remember moving forward is be aware that life is lived in the presence of God. And that is the core of worship. It's not what we say, it's not the abundance or the fluidity or the technicality of our words. It's being aware that life is being lived in the presence of God. So, two observations about all of this. God is aware. God is aware of what is transpiring in His creation. Sometimes it doesn't seem like that to us. And more than once, I've thrown my hands up in the air and said, God, are you sure? You got your finger on the pulse of what's happening here? Because I could give you an update if you're, a little bit out of the loop. No. Throughout this prayer, Nehemiah acknowledges that God was aware, and it's because of their faithlessness that the ancient Israelites went into the Assyrian and Babylonian captivity. God is aware of the details that are transpiring in His creation. So we need to be aware that we are always living in His presence. The omnipresence of God is not that God is in everything, but that all things are in His presence. And it's not just a spatial reality, but it is a truth reality, because all truth is God's truth. It doesn't matter what the source of that truth is. A scientist who denies the reality or the existence of God, an atheist, when he makes an observation about the physical nature of God's created order, that's truth, and that is, in a strange kind of way, an act of worship of God. Because God is the only source of truth. All truth is God's truth. All work is God's work. It doesn't matter what we do, whether it's in the garden or if we're leading a Fortune 500 company or we have those elite jobs that people idolize and we celebrate, the brain surgeon or the rocket scientist. It's like, wow, those are amazing people. But the humble work of an immigrant out in the fields not far from here, caring for fruit trees, is just as dignified in the sight of God. All work is God's work. And all that is good is sourced in God and God alone. Only God is the source of goodness. In Psalm 119, verses 65 to 68, the psalmist said, "When I went astray," or before I went astray, I was afflicted. But now that I have been afflicted, I have learned that you are God and that you are good, and all that you do is goodness. God is good, and all that He does is goodness. Worshiping God, to exalt God, begins by formulating in our hearts and in our minds a perspective that all of life is lived in His presence. He sees the injustice. That doesn't mean that we can become passive to it. There is a time and a place for us to lift our voices and to speak with wisdom and representing Christ well into those. But we're not informing Him. He knows. And He is very much aware. But He's also very much aware of the quiet, private issues of our heart. And as we worship him, as we acknowledge him as creator of heaven and earth, we are aware that we are in his presence, and all of creation is in his presence always. But secondly, our relationship with God is exactly that. It's a relational dynamic. It is personal. Not that it's personal in the sense that, well, I choose this God, and you can choose that God, and you can choose that God, and this is my personalized God. No, it's personal in that God is a person with whom we can relate, and it is relational both collectively and individually. Our relationship with God cannot be reduced to just that my personal choice about God, but God's people form a community, the image of which is body. We've sung about that this morning. And collectively, worship is an activity in which we engage, and individually, it's an activity in which we engage. But I love the way, and it doesn't jump out at us because of the translation issues, but I love the way that Ezra and Nehemiah talk about our God, or their God, or my God. In chapter 9, verse 3, back to Nehemiah, it says, "Now in the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembled with fasting and in sackcloth and with earth on their heads. And the Israelites separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in the place and read from the book of the law of the Lord, their God." What had they done for hundreds of years? They had integrated, they had taken the gods of the nations around them and had made that part of the object of their worship. But now this confession of loyalty, that this is our God. And way back in the beginning, in Deuteronomy, the promise of God to Moses was, "I will be your God, and you will be my people. And I will place my name among you, and I will dwell with you." And that's part of the significance of Jesus coming. He is, in human form, and he dwelt amongst us. So this personal relationship with God, it's not just an abstract thing that we are worshiping, but there is a relationship with this one who is also personal. Twice in chapter 9, verse 3, it refers to, "This is the Lord their God." If you go through Ezra and Nehemiah, 13 times, either Ezra or Nehemiah refers to in their prayer and their intercession with God, that this is my God. And the idea is not that I've chosen from a list, but that I have this relationship, which the other gods out there, if you're going to worship the Baal or the Ashtoreth, that's fine, but they know nothing about you. There's no relationship. And that's evidenced for us in the story of Elijah. That's why those prophets of Baal ran around all day cutting themselves and doing all kinds of weird things to try and get their God to pay attention. And he never did. So Elijah mocks them. Well, maybe he's on a holiday. Maybe he's taking some time off. Maybe he's taking a nap. Wake him up. The idea in the Old Testament of my God, of our God, of their God, is this personal relationship that God has his eye on his created order. He is the creator of heaven and earth and all it contains. He is aware. And our response to him, one expression of worship, is sensitizing ourselves that we are always in his presence and being aware of the reality of his presence in our life, even in the painful moments. Our interaction with God, collectively and personally, is based on this truth that God is aware and we are in the process. We are learning as the Spirit of God transforms us to be aware of how he is present in the life that's happening to us. Because let's face it, just because you have a faith in God through Jesus Christ doesn't mean all your problems go away. It is not rainbows and unicorns and lollipops. It's hard sometimes. And in fact, you read the book of Hebrews, and there are people there because of their commitment to live with this awareness to God, with loyalty to him, were sawn in half, or they suffered other kinds of horrific deaths. And I love that one commentary, people of whom the world was not worthy because of their faithfulness to God. Because they had an awareness that, yes, this is hard, this is wrong, there's injustice. The wrong and brokenness in the world seems to have the upper hand, but I will have faith in the Creator God that He is accomplishing His purposes and His way. And that expression, that confidence, is an expression of worship, that I am aware that God is in heaven above. I am on earth below. May my words be few, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. So awareness in worship, or perhaps it's better to say it this way, worship as awareness, as we become sensitized to the reality of God's compassion and grace, righteousness and holiness in life and our response to Him, means we take on the discipline of intentionally connecting the dots between what is happening here in our reality and who God is as the Creator and the watcher over all things. It's a skill of learning to see the dynamic of God's interaction with His creation, and by faith recognizing it's not always going to be resolved when I want or how I want, but it will be resolved because He is the Creator of heaven and earth. This is what it means to worship God, that I have confidence in Him. It means rethinking our perspective that I'm a Christian so that when I die, I go to heaven, to I am a steward of the creation of the King of Kings, and I serve Him, and everything I do is an act of worship to Him first and foremost. And as I engage in God's created order, even though it's broken and dysfunctional, I do so because He still finds purpose and value in it and has entrusted me with the privilege of serving Him in this until He comes back and restores it to its original goodness. I worship God when I choose to use all of my life to express my submission and loyalty to Him. Obeying speeding limits, not breaking mirrors on cars that cut you off when you're on the highway, being kind to the lady who screwed up the grocery order. Just recognizing that life is not just about having those character qualities, but doing those things because I'm aware that I'm living in the presence of God. I worship God when I begin to embrace the reality that music, science, art, sports, economics, skills and craft, all of it can be used to reflect the glory of God. And that I'm aware that all of these good things He's given to me can be used to glorify and to represent Him well. But it can also be used in ways that don't accomplish that. My faith, my skill in faith allows me to discern. This is God's created order. That's why I love that hymn, "This is My Father's World," written by a pastor who just lived on the other side of the border on the Niagara Escarpment back in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And he was out walking on the escarpment one day and it just kind of overwhelmed him. This is my Father's world. And I get it. If you've walked the Bruce Trail, if you've come down 50 Road or any of these McNeely or any of them that you can kind of stop at the top and look across the lake and see Toronto and in the fall, the colors of the escarpment, and you just stop and hear the bird song. How can you not say, "This is my Father's world"? You have to. It has not been hijacked by Satan. It is infected with sin and dysfunctional because of sin, but it is still subject to the authority of its original creator, Almighty God, creator of heaven and earth. So I worship God by embracing that this is my Father's world, and I am aware that I am living life in His presence. Not that God is everywhere, because He's not in the piano, He's not in the music stand, He's not in the trees, He's not in the rocks, but that all things are in His presence. And He alone is God, because there is no other. In Nehemiah's prayer of confession, that they would again acknowledge and bow down to the Lord their God, is integral to expressing our worship of God, not because of the act of what they did, but because of the passion they had to embrace the reality that God is in heaven and we are on earth.